Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're going to be going over the Hurricane Guided Rocket System, Gunner's third primary weapon. This is one of many videos that is in a series taking a look at all of these weapons. These are brief overviews taking a look at their overclocks and a secondary that I would pair with them. Now, these aren't in great detail, those are saved for separate videos, but each one of these is going to be a generalist build that can work on the majority of missions. There are a couple in here that are a little bit more niche. I'll be going over them or saying what type of missions they don't necessarily work great on, or others that work extremely well on certain mission types too. The Hurricane's got a couple like that. So let's begin. First up, we're going to take a look at its very first clean overclock, which is Manual Guidance Cutoff. Manual Guidance Cutoff is one of the few overclocks in the game that I actually consider an active nerf to your weapon. What Manual Guidance Cutoff does is give you 33% more velocity on your rockets, which is a good thing. That is really nice. But the secondary effect is that once you stop firing the gun, your missiles are no longer guided, whereas if you were to do that with the standard Hurricane, you can still guide them. These ones, they just start going straight. That's not really a great thing. One of the big advantages of the Hurricane is the guided missiles, and not being able to guide them doesn't really help all that much, which is why I consider this one to be an active nerf to the Hurricane. Either way though, this is the way that I'm going to be running the Hurricane. This is kind of my standard Hurricane build for most of the overclocks and just for the standard Hurricane as itself if I was just going to take it on every type of mission. In Tier 1 we're taking extra ammo, but you can take any of them in Tier 1, they're all really good. Tier 2 I'm taking armor breaking because we don't necessarily need extra velocity in Tier 2. Tier 3, we're going a faster rate of fire. That one really helps with the Hurricane's DPS. Tier 4, we're going with weak spot damage so that we can hit things a little bit harder if we are able to hit them in the weak spot, although you could go with AoE. And then in Tier 5, we are going with stun. That way we have a chance of stunning enemies and can just keep guiding Hurricane rockets right into them. And as for a secondary weapon, I did decide to take this with one of the stronger options. I took this with compact mags with a burst pistol. This one allows you to have pretty good ammo as well as deal with just about everything at every range. This is a nice generalist build, but honestly, if I was to take something like this, I would suggest just taking Manual Guidance Cutoff off of the weapon and using it as a standard weapon and then just taking compact mags and the burst pistol. That would actually probably be more beneficial to you than running this particular overclock. Alright, now with that bad overclock out of the way, the rest of them are really good. So our second overclock is Salvo Module. Salvo Module is an unstable overclock that has a very unique ability where it turns your Hurricane into a rocket shotgun. So now instead of just continually firing when you hold down the trigger, you now charge up missiles. You can charge up to 9 of these. The more you have, the more damage you'll do, and you fire this out like a shotgun in front of you. These missiles are also unguided though, so you usually want to be using the shotgun mode at fairly close range so that you can get the most value out of this. The great thing about Salvo Module though is that it doesn't really have much of a downside because you can still tap fire the missiles one at a time if you would like to have guided missiles, which can be great for picking off things like web and acid spitters at a distance and applying pressure to larger things like spitballers or menaces. The way I have Salvo Module built is like this. In Tier 1 I'm running more ammo. You can take whatever you'd like in Tier 1 though. Tier 2 armor breaking, this one or the extra speed, both of them work pretty well. Tier 3 I would highly recommend that you take the increased rate of fire. This charges up missiles faster. It makes it a little bit more easy in crowds. Tier 4, I would recommend the bigger AoE damage, because even though weak spot damage can help you here, AoE damage generally helps a little bit more with the rocket shotgun as it is. And then in Tier 5, I go with stun just so that we can stun things more often. You could take fire here though too, unless you're going to be taking this on a Dreadnought mission, then don't take fire because you can't light them on fire. Now since Salvo Module is pretty well rounded as an overclock, you can kind of take whatever you'd like as a secondary. For me, I decided to take elephant rounds with the revolver. This just lets me have really high damage at very long range against big single targets, so I can kill off things like Tri-Jaws and Spitballers a little bit easier, or Menaces a little bit easier, and then I can use the Hurricane to clear up any of the smaller enemies, or just apply high damage to bigger enemies at close range with the rocket shotgun. For a third overclock, we're going to be going over Mine Layer System. Mine Layer System also cuts off your missiles from being guided, and I think this is the last one. I'm kind of surprised we did all three of these in order. But what Mine Layer System does is once you fire your missiles, if they hit the ground, then they stick into the ground and become armed after a short time. Once they are armed, then if anything steps across them or steps near them, this will explode, dealing damage to it. And this does increase its damage quite a bit, as well as the explosion damage from the mine scales off of your area damage. Downside is that we get no guided missiles, and we also lose out on a slight amount of overall ammo. The way I like to build this is like this. So in Tier 1 I'm running extra ammo, but you could take extra AoE with this too. Both of them are really good with this particular overclock. I just like going with more ammo so I can go back up to the normal amount of ammo. Tier 2 I'm taking armor breaking, but increased speed can also work. Just depends if you want to be using your rockets every once in a while to hit things directly with them so that you can get the armor breaking, because I don't know if they trigger on the explosion. at least from the mine. But you could always go with the increased velocity too, that works as well. Tier 3, faster rate of fire, although you could go with a larger mag size, both of them work. I like the faster rate of fire so I can set up my mines a little bit quicker. Tier 4, I would highly recommend that you take the extra AoE damage. That usually gets you a lot more than just the weak spot damage. And then in tier 5 I'm going with fire. This is so I can set up fire mines. If you don't like this though, you can go with the stun. Stun's really good with this one too, especially if you're going to be taking this on something like a dreadnought mission. Then again, don't take the fire. This one can pair pretty well with just about anything, but I would recommend that you get something with longer range overall, because the Hurricane with Mine Layer system does not do well against flying enemies or enemies on the ceilings at all. I'm going to be taking Triple Tech Chamber as my secondary. This is for the coil gun. This lets me have pretty decent damage and decent crowd control where I can slow them down with the electricity on this as well. And this way I can pick off things like web and acid spitters as well as Magterra a little bit easier. You could also go with something like Hellfire with the coil gun. That works really well too. For our 4th overclock, we have Overtuned Feeding Mechanism. This is another clean overclock that I consider to be one of the best overclocks for the Hurricane. This increases our velocity by 20% on all the missiles, which is pretty nice. And the big thing is that it gives us 1 rate of fire, which is really good for the Hurricane. Basically, it gives us our tier 3 rate of fire, and this is the way I like to build it. This being a clean overclock though, and just being a bonus, you can kind of build it however you'd like. Tier 1, I'm taking ammo. Again, any of them in tier 1 are good. Armor breaking in tier 2, increased magazine size in tier 3, because we already have the increased rate of fire. You could go with even more rate of fire if you'd like. That gets you a lot of DPS, which can be really fun, but I like having the 72 round magazine. That's pretty useful. Increased weak spot damage in tier 4, and then stun in tier 5. Again though, since this is a clean overclock, you can kind of build it however you'd like. There's not really a wrong way to build it. There's not really a bad secondary to take with this either. Take whatever you'd like. I'm running lead spray on the burst pistol. This is so I can have really high damage at close range against big targets. Then I can clear up everything else with the Hurricane at any sort of range, because it's going to be pretty easy for me to guide the missiles into them, and I have a huge magazine size to just keep firing at longer ranges too. Our 5th overclock is Jet Fuel Homebrew. This one's an unstable overclock that greatly increases our direct damage and increases our maximum velocity, as well as increases our starting velocity, so missiles become a little bit more difficult to actually steer into enemies, and this becomes more of a hit scan like weapon. Not entirely, because there is still travel time, but usually I find it a little bit easier to just aim directly at something with this one, more so than trying to curve the missiles into them. Downside is that we lose out on a lot of area damage, a lot of AoE, magazine size, and total ammo. The way I like building this is going for all damage, so I usually build it just like this. Going with damage in tier 1, this scales our damage up pretty high, and this combined with our tier 4 with the weak spot damage makes it extremely strong against any big targets, so long as we're hitting them in the weak spot, so that's really nice. Tier 2, we're going with armor breaking. Armor breaking is also really good with this one because we are doing such high damage. You don't really need extra velocity with tier 2. You can take it and then it's more of a hit scan type weapon, but I find armor breaking to be a little bit more useful on this one than the velocity. In tier 3, extra rate of fire, just so we can go up to that 4 rate of fire, which feels really nice. Tier 4, weak spot damage, because we can hit things even harder. And then in tier 5, we go with the stun. That way we can also stun large enemies, which is great. This one being really good at single targets. It's not the greatest against crowds. It is actually pretty good against crowds, but it's just you don't have very much ammo. So I decided to take a secondary that would kind of solve that problem. I'm taking Hellfire for the coil gun. This one can do pretty decent single target damage, again, so long as you're not hitting dreadnoughts with it. Even if you are, it should deal still pretty decent damage, but mostly it's going to be really useful for clearing out large hordes of enemies. It's really good at taking out robots too. Both these in combination is extremely strong on like an industrial sabotage mission. Up next we have Plasma Burster Missiles, and Plasma Burster Missiles is definitely one of the odder ones for the Hurricane. So what Plasma Burster Missiles does is that it significantly nerfs pretty much all of our damage. It nerfs our area damage, our direct damage, total ammo, as well as our effect radius, and our maximum velocity. But now all of our missiles can pierce through enemies multiple times, exploding multiple times in them, which is pretty interesting. There is quite a few different ways you can build Plasma Burster Missiles, and it's probably the only overclock that can take advantage of the nitroglycerin compound in tier 5 if you want to take that one. I decided to take it like this. So in tier 1 I'm going with extra ammo. This is just to make up for our lack of ammo. Tier 2 I went with higher velocity so that we can turn it a little bit better, but armor breaking also works pretty well in this one. Tier 3, increased rate of fire so we could spit these missiles out a little bit quicker. Tier 4, increased weak spot damage so that we can hit weak spots a little bit easier. It's very easy to do that when the missiles just punch right through enemies. And then in tier 5 I'm going with fire so we can light things on fire. You could also go with stun or nitroglycerin compound for this one. All of them work pretty well on Plasma Burster Missiles. You just have to actively be moving your missiles around pretty often, so it gets a little bit strange. As well as Plasma Burster Missiles does have one unique feature in that it can one-shot any of the flying rocks on escort missions on any difficulty. I decided to pair this with volatile bullets from the revolver, making it so that if we do light something on fire with the Hurricane, we can easily kill it with the revolver because you do massive damage. Obviously, again, don't take this build on a Dreadnought mission. It's not going to go away great for you. You're not going to be able to do very much damage to them. And then for our 7th and final overclock, we have Fragmentation Missiles. This one gives us larger area damage as well as a larger area effect radius. It's a very simple overclock, but a very good one for the Hurricane. I like building it like this, so in Tier 1 I take bigger AoE. This one makes it so that we can have an even bigger explosion and cover more bugs per shot with this. Tier 2 I like going with the armor breaking, although you could take extra velocity, both are good. Tier 3, increased rate of fire. I like having the higher rate of fire. Tier 4, more area damage because we might as well embrace the area damage with this one. And then in Tier 5, stun, although you could also take fire with this one, depending on if you want to light things on fire, if you just want to have a higher chance of proccing stun because you're going to be hitting more enemies. This one's a clean overclock though, you can build it however you'd like, it's just a straight bonus to the weapon, and you can take whatever secondary you'd like with it. I'm taking Mole for the coil gun. This makes it so we have incredibly high amounts of single target damage, and then we can just use the Hurricane to clear up crowds because we have it built all against crowds. It will still work decently well against larger enemies though too, so if you do need to use it against Praetorians or Oppressors or whatever, it should do just fine for you. And that's all the overclocks for the Hurricane. Hopefully this kind of helped you out and give you some builds to try out with the Hurricane for its different overclocks. Thank you guys so very much for watching this, and if you would like to see my other videos just like this, be sure to click over here somewhere. There should be a playlist that'll take you to where I have all of the other builds for the weapons that we've covered so far.